Joining us from his home in Catskill, New York, award-winning journalist Steve Hartman. Steve, man, listen, I'm watching this and I'm tearing up. I remember starting out in the business and I went to some writer's workshop, and the memory actually just came to me when I was walking out, and they played one of your stories as an example of how to storytell and meet people where they are. Could you have ever imagined when your stories are the kicker, they're the last thing in the newscast, but it's the thing that people so often most remember about those 30 minutes.
I could not imagine. I mean, just the fact that I'm on your show, I'm the guy that does the last story on the last show of the week. And it's supposed to be the most insignificant story coming after all the important news. But here I am on your show, and I guess I need to realize that maybe it does matter more than even I know.
Are you still reconciling that again, the lead story, as they call it, people assume is the most important, but yours is the one, Steve, that people will call their parents or friends and say, did you see that story? Did you hear what that little boy said? Do you now grasp the full impact of it? Because I see it in your face and I can see the emotion already. You're crying like me.
Well, a little bit. I think what's happening is you watch the first 22 minutes of any newscast and you start to get a skewed sense of what your community is like. You think there's more crime than there really is, that there's more acrimony than there really is. And so I think we've come to count on that last story at the end of the newscast to remind us that we're not as different as we think we are, and that we have reason to have faith in humanity.
Yeah. In 2014, you actually did a story about a young football star who decided to join a book club. Now, that is not a big, sexy headline, but it resonated. Let me show it.
In Athens, Georgia, in the bestseller section of this Barnes & Noble, Kathy Rackley found a novel story of her own.
I mean, a chance encounter in a bookstore, how wonderful is that?
Did you have any idea at all who he was?
None.
And you didn't tell her?
I didn't, but I knew they were going to find out.
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to say it.
Fact is, Kathy may have been the only one in Athens who didn't know the name Malcom Mitchell. Number 26 for the University of Georgia Bulldogs was one of the top recruits in the country a few years ago. He's Georgia royalty, and presumably, if Kathy had known that, she wouldn't have stood in that Barnes & Noble talking his ear off about the book club she'd just joined.
I mean, he stepped back and he said, you did? And he said, can I join your book club? And I said, I don't know if you want to join mine. We're all 40, 50, and 60-year-old women.
But Malcom was undeterred. So now, one of the top wide receivers in the country meets monthly with his book club lady friends.
Oh, yeah. And then he went to the wedding.
I love that part.
He's the only man and the youngest by a generation. But Malcom doesn't care, nor does he care what anyone thinks.
Somebody called me a nerd. It's not a word that I'm used to hearing.
Is it okay, though? Are you okay with the label?
I was proud of it.
Great.
It's like a badge of honor to me, knowing where I came from.
Malcom confessed to me that when he started college, he could only read at about a junior high level, and it bothered him. So he started putting as much effort into his reading game as his football game.
Every free moment, he had a book in his hand. He's now reading things he never dreamed he could. And although some of the book club selections he would never pick himself, Malcom seems to enjoy them all.
Yeah, the ending was great.
Looking at your life now, all you've accomplished, what are you most proud of?
I finished the Hunger Games series in about 2 days.
Reading the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of the footage of you scoring touchdowns? That's not your most proud moment?
That came natural. That's a gift. I had to work to read.
But his greatest talent may lie in his ability to step so outside his comfort zone, to be able to meet people and focus so sincerely on what they have in common instead of their trivial differences.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Sometimes football makes great men, and sometimes great men just happen to play football.
Joining us now from Atlanta, Georgia, Malcom Mitchell. Malcom, it's so good to see you. Listen,
Thank you so much.
do you recall how Steve approached you? How did he even hear about you?
I think one of the book club members had a close friend with UGA media department rep, and she talked to her at church about the story. And I think Steve picked up on it through some article that UGA had initially released. And from that moment, Steve has been an extremely close friend, extremely close supporter. I've reached out to him on things outside of that initial meeting, and he's a really good friend, and I love him.
Oh my gosh. Well, listen, you went on to play for the Patriots. You won a Super Bowl with them in 2017. But as Steve pointed out before the break, a part of the story that never aired was him tapping into the next chapter after football, what your real gift perhaps was. And it wasn't football in many ways. It turns out that there was something else pulling on your heartstring, another part of your life.
I'm not sure Steve knows the amount of inspiration and hope that he kind of interjected in my life. He had opened up the doors for an unbelievable amount of belief in myself. And soon after that interview, I started to pursue a more invested search for literacy, which spurred me on to become a children's book author and start my foundation, Share the Magic Foundation.
And so you self-published, I have a copy of it, your first book, The Magician's Hat. You signed a deal with Scholastic. A year later, you told the producers, my producers, that it meant more, this book meant more to you than the Super Bowl ring.
It's the truth, you know. As football is something that was very self-gratifying, and I was able to do some really cool things, but those things were for myself. But writing is for kids around the world who struggled with reading just as I did, who don't understand the importance of literacy, who need this tool to help enhance their life. That's why I write these books for kids, and that's why I started Share the Magic Foundation.